Instead of our usual sort of sermon, we're going to go through an interview, a few questions with Simon. There we are. Thank you. As if we had planned this and everything. This is what I'm looking for. Thank you. So you've got a QR code there. So what we're going to do is sort of in the middle of the questions, we're going to let you ask some questions. We're filtering it online because in case anyone's asking something too difficult.
What kind of level filter are you putting on tonight? Just out of interest, so I can kind of mentally prepare myself.
So Alicia's going to decide what we can ask or what we can't. But yeah, we're quite ruthless here, sorry. It's not like the TV, here's proper ruthless. So, Simon, you used to live in my house way back. So for those of you who don't know, I live next door, and Simon used to live there. Can you tell us about sort of your life here, living next door and here in St. Paul's?
Well, I got here a bit early, so it's been a bit of a trip down memory lane. So my son Ethan is over there, sat next to Toby. He's 15, sorry to embarrass you, boy. But we did a very quick whistle-top tour of Cheam. Went through Cheam Village. I said that when we moved from Norfolk to here in 1983, this was so exciting because we were in a small village. This felt like a massive town, but it's actually not that big. And we went past the Harrow pub, which is still there, and then came down some old roads, and then we arrived at the house. And I said, that is where we used to live. And actually, I drove around the back. This is a bit nerdy, sorry, but went into the car park behind, and I could see the middle window at the top at the back glowing. And I said, that was my bedroom for 13 years. That's where I was. For me, it feels like kind of yesterday. It's a bit of a while ago. But for Ethan, it's like this is like black and white days. This is yesteryear. But yeah, we arrived here in 1983. My dad was vicar here for those 13 years. He oversaw the building of this place with an amazing team around him. And I was saying to Ethan and Toby that my memories of when it first opened in 1989 is that Dad and the shared leadership team and the PCC team didn't want anything getting dirty. Didn't want anything getting scuffed. Any youth people who were caught at the back with their feet up on the cushions like that, like me and Ethan had ours up, but there's no cushions, were told off. There was a big debate about a youth event that was going to happen here and whether or not we should allow the young people to come in with their shoes on or shoes off. There was a real push in the PCC for it to be shoes off, but in the end, I think Dad said, look, if you're going to encourage young people to come to church, asking them to take their shoes off probably isn't the best way of doing it. So, yeah, we were here for 13 years, and I've got so many happy memories. I was speaking to my mum on the way here. She didn't know we were coming here tonight. I said, look, you can watch it on YouTube. By the way, I got a shock because today I thought I'll check out if it's on YouTube, and it said Simon Thomas preaching on Luke, and I thought, I'm sure, Nico, you said it was a Q&A, but I sent the link to Mum. So hopefully, if you're watching, good evening. She's living in Cromer now, and Dad passed away around about 4 years ago. So I've got so many happy memories here, and there's been so many lovely familiar faces. Di Vine coming in with Tim just a few moments ago, still talks to Mum very regularly, still good friends, even though Mum lives all the way in North Norfolk. So this was a really special place. And actually, as we were worshipping and as I watched the young people gathering, I just cast my mind back to the late 80s and early 90s. I was like you guys, sat in the kind of tiered seating, looking on, thinking, should I engage with this or not? Should I act a little bit kind of detached and cool? I was exactly that person all those years ago, and it feels like I've sort of stepped back in time, but into a really lovely place, but now very much in 2025.
Brilliant. So you work on TV. How did you sort of start that journey into working on TV shows?
It's quite a long journey in the end. If anyone's looking for God's guidance in something, you'll often hear the phrase, God's timing. God's timing is often very difficult to us. Actually, my first real taste of media and of broadcasting was actually with Tim a long time ago, and it was at a church called St Andrew's Church, which is further up Northey Avenue. For the young people here, you won't have heard of this. For certain generations here, you will. There was something called Radio Cracker that happened, I think, one Christmas, maybe a couple of Christmases, and it was run by a charity that I ended up working for called the Oasis Trust. And I don't know how they did this, but over the course of this Christmas, they secured local radio licenses right around the UK, and for one month, to raise money for lots of amazing projects Oasis were working with, they would have these radio stations. And we had one here in Cheam. Radio Cracker was here in Cheam. There was a studio up the road at St Andrew's Church. And I decided, let's do a show. I think we did 3 in the end, called the Rock and Laugh Show. Funnily enough, Tim provided the comedy. I provided just banal nonsense in between songs. And I think one Christmas, myself, Tim, and a couple of others called Silas, and a guy called Kristen Meadows, who's a close mate of mine, did a special Christmas show. And I thought, you know what? I just love this art of communicating. I love broadcasting. I like that feeling of being live, even though, to be honest, it was just friends and family listening. The audience wasn't big. But I kind of came away from that, went to university in Birmingham. I studied history. There were no real media courses back in the early 90s. And I started doing a TV program at university on our internal TV station. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I presented a weekly show called The Lunchbox. Again, nobody watched it. It was on televisions in the student union, on mute. Literally, no one paid any attention. Even my housemates had no idea what I was doing every Friday lunchtime. But I left university, and I thought, this is what I want to do. And I wanted to do Blue Peter. That was the show I wanted to do. For certain generations here, you'll think, what is that program? Believe me, back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s, and most of the noughties, it was one of the biggest kids programs in the land. It's been going for 60 plus years. How it's still going, I've no idea, because my son doesn't watch anything in terms of linear TV. It's all YouTube and nonsense online, but we'll come on to that later. It's not all nonsense, by the way. But it was a very different time. But I came out and thought Blue Peter, this amazing kids show that offers you the chance to travel, to do adventure, to do daring things, is the one I want to do. But I know it's going to be so hard to get it. And just briefly, as I went back home after university to where my parents were now living, they moved to Beccles in Suffolk after leaving Cheam in 1995. I was about to start writing letters. The internet hadn't even begun back then. That's how old I am. So it was time to write letters to lots of different editors of programs to get work experience, to put together a show reel tape, which is you presenting, to send to Blue Peter, send to other programs as well. And I was about to go down and sit at my dad's computer. He was about to head out for a meeting. And I thought, I've never really prayed about this. I've never prayed about whether this dream that I've got of being in the media, this dream I've got of being a Blue Peter presenter one day, I've never once asked if this is what God wants me to do. And so I thought, I'm just going to pray before I head down to my dad's computer. And I'm going to pray a really bold prayer, and that is, God, I need a sign, because I've given myself 3 years. I still, to this day, don't know why I made it 3 years, but 3 years to make it, and if I didn't, then I'd find something a little less exciting to do. But I said, please, God, I need to know that you are in this. It's not just my dream, but you're separate to it. Amen. And I went down to the study, and sometimes God is someone who answers prayers in really direct ways. Sometimes it's in ways we can only see as we look back in time. But I sat at my dad's desk. I can vividly remember it now. And there was a pile of his Christian magazines on the left-hand side of the desk. I can't remember the name of the magazine, but I just kind of glanced at it before writing these letters. And on the kind of sub-headlines on the side of the magazine was this article inside, which was titled, "Why We Need More Christians in the Media." I was like, wow, right. So I feverishly turned to the page, and it had been written by a guy called Steve Chalk, who heads up the Oasis Trust, where I ended up working for a bit, and a lady called Pam Rhodes, who at the time was presenting Songs of Praise on the BBC. And it was one of those moments where you may have had it in this church, if you've been coming here for a time. You may have had it in a youth meeting somewhere, I don't know, where you're listening to someone talking up on the stage, and it feels like that message is only being said for you. And it was like this article had been written just for me, and the whole thrust of the article was simply this: if you want to see a change in television, a change in radio, a change in terms of the articles you read in your newspapers, if you want to be a positive Christian influence in those places, it's all very well setting up Christian radio stations and Christian TV stations, but if you want to see change, we need Christian presenters, we need Christian editors, producers, journalists, cameramen, camerawomen. The list went on in the mainstream media, and it was like the green light. It was like the green light. In the end, it was close on 4 years, 2 failed attempts where I kind of nearly gave up. I was working in Selfridges in London for 2 years after university, selling Hugo Boss suits, trying to make a living so I could survive in London town. I was running at LBC Radio in the week. I was running at CBBC at the weekends. You want to know what a runner's job is? If you ever end up doing this, I was actually chatting to one of them on Soccer Saturday yesterday and just said, hang in there, because it's a thankless task. You essentially make teas and coffees for people, but you've got your foot in the door. You're in the place, you can start having a conversation with people. But having nearly given up, a third chance came on the program. I thought, I'm going to give it one last whirl, sent in my showreel tape, and in late 1998 landed the job.
That's brilliant. And how was it sort of, Blue Peter's a big show. How was it being a Christian in that environment? How did it feel? How did you interact with people?
Yeah, it was quite hard, actually, and it was hard for this reason. So again, for the younger generations who don't know much about this show, it was watched back then, a good day, a really good show was watched by between 6 and 7 million. Around about Christmas time, we get 7 million watching. That is figures that most TV shows now can only dream of, because TV is so different. It's fragmented. People are watching things online and through Netflix and different things like that. So it's a very, very different landscape now. But back then, shows like that would command big audiences. So getting the job was big news. I replaced someone who'd been famously sacked from the job for taking a Class A drug. He got outed in a national newspaper. So I took over from him. So there was a huge amount of interest in who was the person they were going to go for after the guy who got sacked for drugs on the country's most famous children's television show. And I'd got the job in late December 1998, and it was due to be announced at the start of January that I was the new presenter and I'd be on my first show. The good old Daily Mail got hold of the story early doors, ahead of it all being formally announced. And it was out there on a Friday. I was starting a week later. And I remember my dad ringing me. He was in Beccles in Suffolk at the time. He rang me. I was living in Brixton. He says, what on earth do I do? I said, what are you on about, Dad? He said, I've literally got a News of the World journalist outside the front door now who is demanding a picture of you in a choir boy's outfit, because all the media knew, all the Daily Mail knew, was my name was Simon, my dad was a vicar, and I was a Christian. So right from the off, I had no choice whether my faith was out there publicly or not. It was put out there immediately. The Guardian described it, because I used to do these beach missions for Scripture Union Beach Mission. Toby did it, a few others did it as well, who came to this church. And I was described by the Guardian as this kind of Bible basher who was found in the summer walking up and down the beaches of North Norfolk preaching to people with a floppy Bible. That is simply not true. I did some preaching on the beach, but I didn't go up and down the beaches with a floppy Bible. So it was out there from the start that I was a Christian. And it was music to the ears of the media, because this was a lovely contrast between what had gone before, and now they've gone for the Christian goody two-shoes. And I found it hard, because what it meant is that everyone immediately was aware that you were a Christian, and without putting kind of too grandiose a term on it, you ended up almost becoming, by default, without any choice, a bit of a poster boy for the Christians within this country. And I would get sent so many lovely messages from people encouraging me, but also people saying, really looking forward to seeing how you witness and proclaim the gospel on Blue Peter. And I'm thinking, how do I do that? How do we come on air on a Monday afternoon alongside Matt Baker and Connie Huck and Liz Barker and say, good afternoon, it's Monday afternoon, welcome to Blue Peter, it's BBC One. Before we go any further and tell you about an amazing show, I just need you to know that the Lord Jesus Christ died for you. And if you believe in him, you can have eternal life. Coming up later, we've got a bit on lederhosen. And you just couldn't do that. But I would get people, very well-meaning people, sending me these bracelets through the post. Now, some people won't remember these, but there was a craze for wearing these bracelets. They had the initials on WWJD. It wasn't JD and Coke. It was, what would Jesus do? It stood for. And because on Blue Peter, we would do what was called makes. We would show you how to make something out of various bits and bobs you could find around your house. And as you made a craft item, or maybe a banana bread cake, or whatever it might be, as you made it in the studio, live on television, it would feature very close-ups of your hands. So it was important to have clean fingernails, well-trimmed nails. But people sent these bracelets in saying it would be an amazing witness if you wear this bracelet on the show, because everyone will see that you're a Christian. So I actually found it quite difficult. I didn't know how to navigate it, because you were getting invitations to lots of things, to speak at different things. And I didn't want to be this person who just rocked up at every single event and was speaking at every single event, because I wanted to get in this first and foremost because God had made it clear this is where he wanted me to be. And I wanted my job to be about being salt and light in the place that I was working. And if it gave me a chance in the terms of how I presented and the kind of things I presented, to come across as a Christian, to know that there was a deeper value to my life than just being on the telly. That was what I wanted to do, not great big proclamations of the gospel at the start of a show on a Monday, because in truth, Nico, I wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes if I had done that.
And how did you see God's faithfulness? Did you have we've got a little video, but do you want to sort of introduce it to tell a bit about God's faithfulness in the midst of leading a TV show?
Yeah, God's been, we'll come on to more of this later, incredibly faithful right throughout all my life at different times and at different junctures. I'll tell you a story where he, again, was amazing in the way that he intervened. One of the things I wanted to do on Blue Peter was parachute jump. I desperately wanted to learn how to skydive. And so we had been thinking about this for a while, about revisiting this film, because it had been done by various presenters down the years. So it was my turn, new generation watching, so a fresh audience. And so the premise of the film was this, that is that I was going to learn to skydive with a display parachute team called the RAF Falcons. And we would train with them in San Diego in America over the winter, because that's where they do all their winter jumping, because it's blue skies and jump weather every single day. And then that next summer, we'd come back to the UK, and I would do a display jump with them at some air shows somewhere in the UK. So that's the plan. And out we go to San Diego. I'm excited. I'll be honest, I was nervous as well. I go out with the RAF Falcons. There's some strong characters on that plane as we headed out to San Diego. And we get jumping. First one was incredibly nerve-wracking, but I think there's something wrong with you if when you dangle your feet out of an aircraft at 14,500 feet, you're not initially nervous on the first one. And I probably did, I think, 3 jumps, and they all went pretty much okay. You jump out with an instructor either side of you, and they hold onto your arms. You drop down to 5,500 feet, so you're dropping at 120 miles per hour. And as a beginner, you pull at 5,500 feet. So I had 2 instructors, one called Toby, one called Roger, and out we went for the 4th time. And we're coming down, and they're holding on because they're wanting to make sure you get your body position right, because it's absolutely key when you're skydiving that when it comes to pulling the chute, your body is essentially like that, with the backpack pointing upwards, pointing northwards, because then the parachute goes into free air, opens, and doesn't get twisted. So they're making sure you're right for that. As we get to pull height, I went to pull the parachute. It felt like a lot longer than it was, but nothing happens. And I can start to feel the panic setting in. You can't see the ground rushing at this point. You've still got a bit of distance. But nothing is happening. I can feel just this horrible, sick feeling inside me. And I'm beginning to kind of move my arms in sheer panic at why this parachute has not appeared above my back. I can also feel this strange kind of banging on my sides as well. And then eventually, thank the Lord, this parachute appears, and I drift gently back down to earth. The mistake they made is after every jump, they'd show you a video back, because you had a cameraman jumping with you to make the program. They'd show you what you got right and what you got wrong. And I watched on in sheer horror, because that punching I felt on the side was Toby and Roger, because as I pulled it, the spring mechanism that fires the little drone chute out to catch the air and pull the main chute out never appeared. And they were punching it out of my back while we were dropping at 120 miles per hour. So anyway, to cut a long story short, that was the end of the trip. I never, ever got my bottle back. I got back in the plane one more time. I jumped, but it was absolutely horrendous. And the trip essentially came to an end, and it came to an end in failure. And I came home with the kind of tail between my legs and really disappointed. Felt like I'd let everyone down. I'd let myself down. I was supposed to be this brave Blue Peter presenter, but I was a bit of a wimp on this occasion. And about 6 months later, I just had this idea in my head, because we did make a show about it, and actually it was quite a powerful show, because it was saying to young people, do you know, you are going to fail at times in life. You are going to not quite achieve what you set out to do, but there is always a way back. And I thought the best way to complete this story would to be go back and conquer my fear. So I persuaded the program, could we go back? I did a few jumps in Oxford to get my bottle back, and back we went to San Diego a year later after that first trip. And we walked back. They booked the same hotel. It was just walking back into the same hotel that obviously looks the same. It smells the same. And it fired off all the horrible memories from 12 months ago. And having been full of kind of bravado, and I'm going to do this on the plane out there, I felt sick as anything. I didn't sleep that night. I get up the next morning. I'm looking into the eyeballs of my director, Alex, who directed me the year before. And he's looking at me saying, have you lost your bottle? You look awful. I said, it's just jet lag, just jet lag. Anyway, so we're about to go to the jump zone. We're about to do this first jump. I'm thinking, I can't fail again, but I also can't jump out of the plane, because all night long, this is the thing that had messed with my head. And it was this one single question that went round and round and round again. Tomorrow, I am taking the decision to jump out of a healthy aircraft at 14,500 feet, and I'm putting my faith and my trust and my life in the hands of 2 bits of material and a load of string. If both of the main shoot and the reserve fail, I find out tomorrow if this God that I've believed in since I was so young, the God that I came here into this very church and worshipped as a teenager, isn't real, then none of this has been worth it, and it messed with my head. So before we went to the jump zone in the minibus with the RAF guys again, I went across the road to get some donuts for the team. Always goes down well at the start of the day. And I rang a really close friend called Phil Wall, who's been like a Christian mentor to me down the years. And he said, look, if you're struggling when you're out there, give us a ring. So I just rang Phil. I said, Phil, I'm in real trouble. I can't do it. I can't do it. I told him about what I'd wrestled with all night. I said, I haven't got really long to talk. Please help. He said, right, bud, I'm going to pray for you right now. And again, it was one of those direct prayers, like that one in my bedroom in Beccles all those years ago about Blue Peter. He said, God, I pray right now that Simon would know in a really direct way that you are for real and that he would go and do this. Amen. Put the phone down, get the donuts. Just as I'm about to cross back over the highway to the hotel car park, I feel this tap on my right shoulder. Holding the donuts in my left. I looked to my right, and standing where you sat now, that kind of distance, was this young American guy. And he looked at me in the eye, and I looked at him and thought, what does he want? And he just said, and I won't do the act, he just said, I just want you to know that Jesus is for real, and he loves you. I look back, and this guy's gone. He's literally vanished. Unless he had been the fastest runner who's ever existed on planet Earth, would have left Usain Bolt in his absolute wake. This guy has disappeared. And then I thought, literally minutes ago, Phil has prayed that amazing prayer. He's asked for God to directly show me that he is real, he loves me, and this guy has just appeared out of nowhere. And I firmly believe that that was God in human form, in the form of an angel, coming alongside me and saying, you can do this. And we went to the drop zone. And the first jump was a bit nerve-wracking, but I think you got a little video clip. This was a massive answer to the prayer. It was failure the year before. It was nearly failure again, but then it's a direct intervention from God, meant that actually for the next few days, I had just the best time.
Let's watch the video.
Ready? Have any questions?
No, I just want to get it over and done with.
Good. Okay.
It's the most important thing for me.
Stay relaxed, stay focused, and you have no problem. Okay?
The longer I wait, the worse it gets.
All right, let's do it.
Cover horizon, out of shoot. 4, 5, legs out.
Ricky D.
Here we go.
Just do a handles touch once you've done that. Familiarise yourself. Down. Good, everything's good.
It had taken all I'd got to get out of the aircraft, but now in freefall, things weren't so bad as I'd expected. I could do it, and I felt confident. Not happy, just confident.
I did it! Oh my days. I never thought I'd ever jump out of a plane in San Diego again. But I've done it. I didn't sleep well. I woke up. I could hardly eat my breakfast. I was that scared. As we arrived at the drop zone today, I thought, no way. That for me is a major, major achievement.
That's it, and stand up. Well done. Pull in one toggle.
Yes! Come on.
Well done.
Guys.
That's a big step. Well done.
That for me
Mr. Thomas.
Here's a massive step.
Good job. Well done. That's brilliant. Well done. So then you move from like a kids show.
This is quite a contrast.
Yeah. You moved from the kids show to working in sports. How did that happen? How did you sort of change career or change your path?
I would obviously always love sport. I'd always love football. And I just felt when I started on Blue Peter, a lot of very well-meaning people said, you're made for life now. Not financially, but in terms of your career. Or just carry on. You'll be offered lots of things after Blue Peter. I don't think it's because I'm cynical. I think it's just because I'm realistic. I didn't believe them. I felt that I really had to have a plan as to what would come after Blue Peter. And I wanted to get into sports presenting. That was the goal. And one day, hopefully, to present live football. How I was going to do it, I didn't know. I made a few films with BBC Sport as I got towards the end of my Blue Peter career. I remember those, sat down about 2 months before I left Blue Peter in the head of BBC Sports office, a chap called Philip Burney, and I thought everything's pointing towards me starting for BBC Sport. I'm not sure where. I don't expect, of course, to go in at match of the day level, but hopefully maybe doing some match reports on BBC Radio 5 Live, whatever it might be, and everything felt really positive in terms of the noises coming from BBC Sport. But I sat opposite this man called Philip Burney, the head of BBC Sport, and you couldn't have had a less interested man in front of you if you had tried. He listened to everything I had to say, and as I reached the end of all the various things I wanted to do, he basically said, I don't see a kids presenter ever working in BBC Sport. And that was the end of the meeting. And 2 months later, I left Blue Peter. I had nothing to go to. I remember actually being sat in a pub with Toby. I was living in Clapham at the time, the day after my final show on Blue Peter. This amazing high, this huge farewell, the cast of We Will Rock You, the Queen musical in the studio, singing for me. It had been this amazing high. And then a day later, no offense, Toby, it's not about you, but I'm sat with Toby in a pub, and I'm thinking, I've got nothing work-wise to go to. I've just had the most amazing 6 years. I've got nothing. And eventually I went to Sky with my agent for a sit-down with them to see if they might be a little bit more open-minded. And they were. And they gave me a chance. They gave me a couple of screen tests. Actually, one of the screen tests was with a guy called Alan Mullery, a famous footballer, once played for Brighton and Tottenham, played for England as well. He used to come to this church when my dad was here. He's still going. He's still alive somewhere. He was part of my first screen test. And I got given the chance to work on a channel called Sky Sports News. And I did that for around about 5 years. My ambition all the way through, though, was to one day present live football. And I started doing a little bit of schoolboys under 16 internationals called the Victory Shield. Nobody watched. It was like Guild TV days. Then I started doing some under 21 internationals. Then I started doing the Football League. I covered the Football League for about 5 years at Sky. I got the privilege, but also the scary privilege of covering my own team, Norwich City, in the 2015 Championship Player Final at Wembley against Middlesbrough. The biggest game in football in terms of what's at stake. Promotion, riches, the whole lot. And it's your team in the final, and you're presenting and having to play with a very straight bat. And then eventually after that, I got to do the Premier League. That was a picture of me at Old Trafford with Graham Souness, who's not at Sky anymore, and of course Gary Neville. So I did a couple of years on the Premier League. Then, as we'll come on to talk about, I took some time away, and then in the last year and a half, I've gone back to Sky. They always said the door would be open. I have to say, I didn't expect this was the door that was going to open, and my old boss rang me up and said, look, Jeff Stelling is leaving Soccer Saturday. If you know nothing about Soccer Saturday, you know nothing really about Jeff Stelling, all I'll say is he did the show for 25 years. He is an icon of British sports broadcasting. He's an absolute titan of what he did. And I was being asked to essentially come into the space that he'd occupied for a quarter of a century and do a 6-hour show that is utterly bonkers, that covers around about 60 to 65 games every single Saturday from 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I've ended up back at Sky, and I've been back there for the last year and a half. I was in the studio yesterday with the guys. That picture you had of Paul Merson a few moments ago. If you're wondering why it's a yellow suit, for those of you who don't know, he did Strictly Come Dancing earlier this season. And I said to him, on your first show back, I don't expect it to be too many shows that you miss. It wasn't, but it was longer than we thought. I said, you have to wear the yellow suit from the Strictly publicity shot. And I never thought he'd do it. He walked into the office that morning in that suit, and for a whole 6 hours, wore that suit. And of course, we kept having to remind people watching who join us later in the show. They were switching on and putting on social media. Why is Merson in a yellow sparkly suit? Because they hadn't seen the start of the show, but he was a total legend for doing it. I didn't think he would, but he delivered on the promise.
So you met loads of interesting people. Who is like the most important or most interesting person you've met?
I was thinking about this a little bit yesterday because I was lucky enough to meet people like Dennis Law, who very sadly passed away a couple of days ago, an absolute legend of British football, English football, Scottish football. If you're young and never heard of him, look him up. Absolutely sensational player. And he was part of this amazing trinity at Manchester United, which was, of course, George Best and Sir Bobby Charlton. I was lucky enough, I'd never met George Best. I did meet Sir Bobby Charlton. You know, just again, a legend of the game. And I just remember him just being so kind of normal and humble. I'm thinking, this is Bobby Charlton. This is a World Cup winner. No one has done this since. This is one of United's greatest ever strikers. And he's talking to me very, very normally. Really, really humble guy. And I love meeting people like that. I like people who are just really normal, who are just totally kind of unaffected by the success they've had and also the impact they've had on other people's lives. But I think one stands above all the others simply because this is not a privilege that gets offered to many. And it was meeting Her Majesty the Queen. She, as part of her Golden Jubilee a few years ago, part of her Golden Jubilee was visiting various British institutions. And one of them was going to be the BBC. And the two shows she was going to visit was BBC News, bit dull, and Blue Peter. She came in the afternoon on a Monday to visit Blue Peter. We had to pre-record her visit. It went out in the show at 5 o'clock. And basically, the idea was the Queen was going to come in and she was going to meet lots of former presenters. So those of a certain generation will recognise the names Valerie Singleton and Peter Purvis. They were there. Peter Duncan. Others from other generations will recognise that name. So some of the old presenters were there. And there was going to be a long lineup in the studio. And Her Majesty be introduced to all these different people. And then right at the end of the line was going to be Miggins here. And I was basically given the task, because they basically felt that the editor of the programme, I was the least likely to mess my words up. So give it to Simon. I had the task of presenting Her Majesty the Queen with a gold Blue Peter badge. Again, for those who know nothing about Blue Peter, we all had to wear a badge. The best badge, though, was a gold Blue Peter badge. Very rarely given out, but we're going to give a gold Blue Peter badge to the Queen. So in her press officer comes about an hour before the Queen arrives, and the line is already there. And she comes up and she checks with each one of you exactly what you're going to say to the Queen. So she eventually gets to me and says, "What are you going to say to the Queen?" And I said, "I'm going to do a gag." And she went, "The Queen doesn't do gags." And I told her what the gag was. It's not an almighty gag. It's not kind of Tim Vine territory, but I thought it was reasonably funny. Said, "You cannot say that. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Think of something else to say." So I'm saying to the editor, "What am I going to say? I've had this plan for days, and now I've been told by her press officer I cannot say it." Anyway, 5 minutes later, she comes back and said, "If you stick to those words, you can say it." I mean, talk about ramping up the nerves. And then she appears in this unmissable green outfit. And it was such a strange experience because for all of us in here, until the moment she went a couple of years ago, she had been an ever-present. I'm hedging my bets here, no one is older than the Queen. There's a lot of people much younger than the Queen, but she was an ever-present. And you felt like you knew her. So when she walks in, it's a little bit like your grandma coming in. Like, I feel like oh no, I don't, that is the Queen. And as she came down the line, you could see this kind of wave of nervousness beginning to build. And 3 away from me was one of my other fellow presenters, Liz Barker. Liz had been asked to tell Her Majesty a very quick story about taking a group of school children to Auschwitz concentration camp where they made this very powerful film. And Liz was just going to give her a very bite-sized account. Liz's nerves got the better of her. So the editor introduces Her Majesty the Queen to Liz Barker. And he just went, "Your Majesty the Queen, this is Liz Barker." And all Liz could muster was, "I've been to Auschwitz." And the Queen just kind of looked at her, laughed, and went, "Oh, how lovely," and just moved straight on. Left poor old Liz absolutely hanging. And then it arrives at me. And thankfully, which I guess is why they gave me the job, I kept it together and I kept my words together. And so I basically was introduced to her and I said, "Your Majesty, on behalf of the programme," so here you can see the moment, I'm offering the Blue Peter badge out, the gold one. I said, "On behalf of the programme, I'd like to give you," I mean, I'm thinking, this sounds so stupid. This woman has got crowns beyond any wealth we can imagine, and I'm giving her a little badge. "But Your Majesty, on behalf of the programme, I'd like to give you the programme's highest award. It is a gold Blue Peter badge. And Your Majesty might like to know, you can get into the Tower of London free with this." And she laughed. she laughed. So I was like, result, that's one over you, publicity officer. And off she went, never met her again. But it was so bizarre afterwards because I had to do lots of news interviews because people wanted to know, how did you make the Queen laugh? And I found it so bizarre because I thought, do you think this woman never laughs? Do you think she doesn't have a sense of humour? By all accounts, she does, but she's so often in the public limelight. You don't often see her chuckling away. But I just said, I don't know, I just said something about the Tower of London and Free, and she chuckled, and that was it.
Brilliant. So we're now going to have some questions that have been asked through our QR code. So Alicia will lead us on those questions.
Stand by.
So people have been really wanting to know what football team. You mentioned Norwich, is that correct?
I am a Norwich City fan, yes. I have been in my entire life. I grew up for the first 10 years in Norfolk. I always believe support your local team. When I was growing up, Liverpool, in their absolute pomp, I know some would say they are now, but not really any comparison to the Liverpool team of the late 70s and early 80s. They were winning absolutely everything. Everyone at my school, bar two of us, wore a Liverpool top. I chose to follow my own team, Norwich City. As part of me wishes it had been Liverpool, but I've stuck with them through thick and thin, and we're now going through another of our thin periods, beaten by Sheffield United yesterday and on Soccer Saturday. It's never an easy moment to hear another goal has been scored past Angus Gunn, so I'm a Norwich fan.
Amazing. Aside from them, who is your best football player?
Best football player? Oh, we're going to get into the kind of Messi-Ronaldo debate here, aren't we? Yeah. Well, I know why you're going for Lionel Messi, Nico. I mean, that's my favourite one ever. I think because this was the time I was growing up, and I remember being sat in that house next door to here in the summer of 1990, and I literally got on my bike and rode up Northey Avenue and rode down various roads in tears as we lost out to Germany in the semi-finals. And it was Gaza. I absolutely love Paul Gascoigne. Listen, I don't think his career ever became quite what it should have been. Again, for the younger generation, look up Paul Gascoigne best moments, okay? Not all the other stuff, not the fishing rod stuff with Raoul Moat. Just look up best moments, Paul Gascoigne. But that free kick he scored for Tottenham in the semi-final of the FA Cup, watched it in the lounge in Cheam while we were having roast dinner after Sunday morning service. Dad, little bit annoyed I put the telly on, but allowed me because it was a semi-final. Hit that amazing free kick past David Seaman. But in that World Cup, and also the goal he scored in Euro 96 against the Scots was incredible. I loved him. He was a maverick, he was different, and he was someone who was doing it at the kind of age where I'm really engaged. Obviously, I love the people like George Best, and I've loved watching Ronaldo and Messi as well. But I think from an emotional level, but also just because he was something very different to what I'd seen, it'd be Paul Gascoigne.
Amazing. Probably the answer that you weren't expecting. Watching a lot of football, it is noticeable that many more players show a faith through an outward display of prayer and thanks. Do you think there is a movement in faith in sports?
100%, and I'm friends with a number of people who are kind of pushing that. There's a guy called John Bostock. He was at Notts County recently. He's sort of coming to the end of his career. An incredibly talented player. Played for England schoolboys and England under-16s and teams like. He's been largely a football league player, but he's an amazing guy, and I've met him a few times. And he is leading with many different other people, like these forums and these places where professional footballers can get together and support each other through faith, because it can be a hard place to be a Christian, you know, in that macho, testosterone-fueled environment of a football changing room, in a men's football changing room. It's a hard place to be a Christian. But there are so many more Christian guys and women out there who are very, very comfortable and confident in expressing their faith. I loved what Crystal Palace's Mark Gay did the other week. It was the Rainbow Laces weekend. And I was pretty sad that the FA decided to say he couldn't. He wrote, you know, Jesus loves you on the rainbow armband that he was wearing. And I didn't have a problem with that. I like the fact that these guys, Bukayo Saka's got such an amazing Christian faith. I've not met him yet, tried to do a couple of things with him. It hasn't come off yet, but he's a guy who plays amazing football, whether you're an Arsenal fan or not. And what a miss he is, by the way, if you are Arsenal fans. But you don't need me to tell you that. But he's got such a vibrant faith. So there are so many more footballers out there, and actually within the world of sport, who are living their lives in the sporting arena, in the competitive, you know, dog-eat-dog world of sport, but actually have a deep-rooted faith, and I love seeing that.
Amazing, that's really encouraging. Do you have someone specific in your life that has shaped you?
Someone specific in my life who has shaped me. I think Phil, who I spoke about, who was the one who I made that phone call to when I was in San Diego, has been a really important figure in my life. He's someone I bumped into many, many years ago, and I was on Blue Peter. I think what I found hard in kind of being a Christian within the media was, I guess, people knowing how to be around me in church. I think people always felt you wanted to be left alone because you probably got people coming up to you all the time. And so I found church quite lonely. And how do you kind of navigate some of the challenges I was talking about earlier? Phil, who I'd met, used to work for the Salvation Army, does a lot of life coaching now. Sadly, he's living in the United States. He's moved in the last couple of years. But he's been like a Christian mentor for me. So he's kind of walked along the path when it's been rocky, but he's also walked with me along the path when it's been smooth. He supported me at some of my lowest times in my life, has been faithful in terms of praying for me. And he's someone that I've always been accountable to about stuff. So I wasn't going to go into this tonight hugely, but I battled with alcohol for quite some time. I've not drunk for 3 years, and I'm loving life away from alcohol. But he was an amazing support to me during that period where I was struggling with it, because he was such a good person to be accountable to, because he was accountable without judgment. He was accountable without judgment. When we have someone we trust, the only way that relationship is going to work in terms of being able to share things you're struggling with, it has to have an absence of judgment. It has to be Jesus-like, which is full of compassion and understanding and wisdom. And Phil has always been that person in my life. So he's been a massive influence on my life.
Amazing. That's so interesting. What is the best moment in your life?
Wow, gosh. That is the best moment of my life. Can I have a few? I mean, obviously, getting married to Dorina a few years ago was an amazing moment, because we'll talk about what came before it. The birth of Ethan was an amazing moment. The birth of my little one, Talifa. So just to say, you're going to hear a little bit about this in a moment. I've been married for the second time to Dorina, and we've had a couple of kids of our own in the last couple of years. So I'm straddling the parenting spectrum at the moment. I've got the teenage years over to my left. Back home in deepest Buckinghamshire, I have an 8-month-old boy and a 2-month, no, that would be something, a 2-year-old boy called Theo. So I'm kind of at both ends of the parenting spectrum at the moment. So that in a nutshell. And I think away from kind of family stuff, I think the day that I got rang up and said, can you come to TV Centre this afternoon? I was working at Oasis. I'm thinking the audition I've done for Blue Peter, the interview's going to come to nothing again. And I got rung by a guy called John. He said, are you free later this afternoon? I said, yes. He said, can you come to TV Centre? Didn't say why. And I walked in. He met me at reception, took me up to the head of children's office. And she had a bottle of champagne on the table. I thought, that's interesting. Maybe that's for something later. And she told me that I was going to be Blue Peter presenter number 27. I remember walking out of her office, and there on the corridor away from her office was the previous 26 presenters, the presenters I'd grown up watching. And it was such a surreal moment, because it felt in that moment that you joined one of the most exclusive clubs in the land. Only 26 before me, and I'm number 27. And the thing is, I couldn't tell people apart from my family for about 3 weeks. I had to sit on the secret.
That's amazing. So let's go back to a few questions. So we talked a lot of like exciting, fun things, but it hasn't all been like a glamorous ride. Can you share a bit about the harder things you've gone through in life?
I can, yeah. Listen, there's countless people in this room who are going through tough things, have been through tough things, and will go through tough things. Toby, you're an absolute legend. Thank you ever so much. And I'm no different. I've been through stuff in my life. I think the two I talk about, because I know that particularly amongst young people, this has become such a big thing, particularly since COVID, but predating COVID, the advent of social media. Anxiety is a big problem amongst adults as well, but it's a growing problem amongst young people as well, which as a father really, really does worry me, because I know what anxiety is like, and it is something I've really, really struggled with over the last few years. And so taking you back to when I started on the Premier League, I began presenting the Premier League in 2015. And I did a season on that, and I got to my second season. So this is the autumn of 2017 at this point. I loved my first season of the Premier League. It was hard because there was that scrutiny that the Football League didn't have. You know, you only have to look at your newspapers tomorrow and you'll see the vast majority of the sports pages are taken up with the Premier League, and there'll be a little mention of the Championship. And then if you're getting down into the echelons of the Football League and the National League with Sutton United, they're barely going to get a mention. The Premier League rules, rightly or wrongly, but it does. And so you felt that scrutiny every week you went on, every week you'd come off air, and your social media Twitter feed would be full of people complaining about the fact you've been biased against their team or you'd said something wrong. And I found that quite hard to deal with. And in the end, I decided after games, just don't look at social media, because if you've had a good day, why let some oik somewhere in the land spoil your day by telling you you're rubbish? Don't stay away from it. Be disciplined. I'd encourage young people, be disciplined about what you read, what you allow into your headspace. If you're finding comments from people hard, don't look at the comments, switch them off. So I would begin to avoid that. But then at the start of that 2017-18 season, I don't know what it was. I just started the season feeling really comfortable. I was looking forward to it. And then this strange thing entered my life called anxiety. And it came absolutely out of nowhere. I just literally remember waking up one morning in September, and I just felt sick about the thought of doing a League Cup game that night down in Swansea. I was due to get on the train later that day and go down to Swansea to do one of the early rounds of the League Cup. And I felt sick. And this voice in my head was beginning to breathe this element of doubt that I could do it. And I was starting to argue with myself in the kind of silence that I can do this, but this voice was saying, you can't. It's going to be a mess. You begin to catastrophize things when you struggle with anxiety. Everything that once felt simple now feels really, really difficult. And over the next few weeks, this just grew and grew. And every time I tried to work, it was utterly, utterly exhausting. And it was this battle. I would sometimes sit on a train on the way to a game, even though the game I'd just done had been a total success. Everything that needed to work worked. I asked the right questions. I didn't mess my words up. Everything had gone okay. And yet I'd sit on the train on my way to the next game and I was a mess. I sometimes sat in carriages talking to myself, and the people around me would look at me and think, what is this guy doing? Isn't that the guy off the football? And I'd say, you're just rehearsing my lines. And then you get to the game and you do it and it was okay, because it's that kind of fight or flight moment when you go on air. But it just grew, and it got to such an extent that when I was doing the Premier League games, I would be having panic attacks before going on air. And I remember one in particular, I was at Old Trafford doing the Saturday lunchtime game on Sky Sports. And it was Tottenham playing Manchester United at Old Trafford. And so we had Graham Souness in the studio, a guy called Jamie Redknapp. And I hadn't slept a wink the night before. It was just a total mess when I got up. My head feels like fudge cake. I can't string a thought together. So I'm thinking, how do I string a sentence together in 3 hours' time when I go on air? But there's nowhere to hide. And I get to the studio after our production meeting in the car park in the big outside broadcast truck. I've literally computed nothing. We've got an hour and a half build up. I've taken on board nothing of what we're doing. So I'm in kind of sheer panic. How is this going to work? It's going to be chaos. I can't even think what my first question is. And we sat down in the studio, and we were about 20 minutes before going on air. And I can hear my director's assistant saying 20 minutes till we're on air. And I'm like, I can feel the kind of heartbeat going. I can feel my breaths getting quicker and more shallow. I thought, I've got to get out of this studio. And the studio at Old Trafford sits next to a bar. So when you come out of the studio, it's quite busy. Literally the last place I wanted to be, but I had to get out of that studio. I knew there was a disabled loo in the corner. I knew also I shouldn't use it, but I thought on this occasion, if it's free, I just want to be away from everybody for 5 or 10 minutes. I ran across the bar so I didn't engage with anyone, got to the disabled loo, and I just sank to the floor. My breaths were rapid, felt sick as anything. I just began weeping. And I just like, I cannot do this. I cannot do this, but what the heck am I going to do? I'm on air in just over 15 minutes' time. My producer down in the car park in the broadcast truck doesn't even know what's happening. And I rang my wife, Gemma, who I was married to at the time. And I said to her, I don't know what to do, but I'm a mess. I can't do this. And I remember her just saying, you're going to have to, which is quite a hard truth to hear, but I knew deep down I did. You're going to have to, and I'm just going to pray for you. And I remember her praying, just saying, God, I pray right now, just still this storm within Simon and give him the strength to get on his feet and go back to that studio and do his job. And somehow God delivered, and I did, and everything was okay. But when I came off air, it was just a mess. And actually, that was the last game I presented for Sky, because by the middle of that next week, I was in such a bad place that they decided to take me out of the firing line. And deeply scary time of life, because for any of you who've been through mental health struggles and have been through anxiety, when it hits, it really does shake the foundations of life, because everything felt okay. I felt confident in what I did as a job. I felt confident as a presenter. I felt I was good enough to be doing what I was doing. And then suddenly I'm this mess who's weeping in a toilet 10 yards away from the studio. And so it just felt that everything that felt secure in life in terms of my career, in terms of who I was as a person, had kind of vanished. And we had doubts about whether I'd actually ever go back to doing it again.
And then, so where did you see God in that situation? Do you kind of get some strength from God? How do you move forward after you, like, in that point in your life?
Well, I started immediately getting help, and I started getting counseling. I did go on medication, and it's not for everyone medication when you deal with something like anxiety, but it did help me. The problem was, in terms of trying to find God in all this, was that into that bizarre period where you've come away from your job and you are really questioning whether you'll ever do it again, because if this anxiety doesn't go, how do you do it again? In amongst that, so I'd been married to Gemma, Ethan's mum, for 12 and a half years at this point. We got married in 2005. And obviously she was full of a lot of anxiety about whether I would get better, because she's fearing, what does this mean for us as a family going forward if perhaps Simon doesn't go back to doing what he was doing? And she starts feeling unwell during that period. We're into November of 2017, so I came away from work at the end of October. And she starts feeling quite bad regularly. She's getting quite bad headaches every day. And as each day went past, they got kind of longer and more pronounced. And we were kind of, I think, in this kind of slightly foggy landscape mind-wise of being so kind of focused on what was happening with me and the questions about what comes next, that I don't think we as a couple were truly focused on what was happening with her. And I think often mums tend to push on when they're struggling illness-wise. We know how guys tend to deal with illness. That, by the way, is a very young Ethan in the middle, in case you hadn't guessed. Sorry, my boy, there it is. None of the floppy fringe going on that occasion. And that's Gemma there on the left. That was the last family holiday we had together in 2017. And eventually some friends of ours got quite worried. And there was a weekend in sort of mid to late November where she just couldn't get out of bed. She had this awful, awful fatigue. We'd already been to the doctors a couple of times, and the doctors just didn't seem to pick up on what was going on. So they had said, you just need to rest. It's probably related to the insomnia that she'd had since having Ethan. And over that weekend, she really barely gets out of bed. She hasn't got the strength to really get out of bed, even get to the loo. I'm kind of trying to amuse Ethan. We went to see Paddington 2 that just came out in the cinema, but all the time I'm thinking, what is actually going on? And by the Monday, she's in a really bad place, and our friends just said, you need to get her to hospital. And so that evening, she was taken into accident and emergency in Reading, where we were living at the time. And it's one of those moments in life that I know people in this room have had. I was having a conversation with an old friend earlier. They've just, within their family, had this moment. That moment when a doctor comes through and you can see that look in their face, you can see that look in their eyes, and you know it's not going to be good news. And after numerous blood tests, they said, I'm really sorry to say, but your wife has a blood cancer, but we don't know at the moment which strain, because I'm now blood cancer president, UK, and there are so many different strains of blood cancer. We don't know what at the moment. And it was kind of the hours felt like your life again, a bit like when the anxiety hit, was cartwheeling out of total control. And by mid-morning, having taken Ethan to school, trying to explain what's happening without scaring him and mentioning the C word, we are being taken in an ambulance, blue-lighted, from Reading, where we were at the time, to a specialist hospital in Oxford, where that afternoon she was diagnosed with a very rare but incredibly aggressive form of blood cancer called acute myeloid leukemia. It affects around about 3,000 in the UK every year, and it can literally develop in weeks. They said to me after everything happened, she would have only developed it in 3 to 4 weeks. But she was diagnosed with that on a Tuesday afternoon. We were given a 50-50 chance of her ever pulling through. We hung on because of our faith to that 50% chance she would pull through. And yet, by that Friday morning, about 8:30 in the morning, her consultant, because she fell unconscious that night, is sitting with me in this room, just me and him. And he's looking me in the eye and saying, I'm so sorry, but she will not see out the day. And asking me where faith comes into that. I prayed the rest of that day with the most faith I've ever prayed, my hand firmly on her head for hour upon hour upon hour, saying, please God, in the name of Jesus, stop the bleeding in her head that's causing this catastrophe that is going to take her life. Please don't leave my boy without a mum. Please, Lord, don't. But I had this sense by about mid-afternoon that that prayer wasn't going to be answered, that whatever was happening, God wasn't going to intervene in this situation. And by 5:45 that night, she was gone, and she was only 40 years of age. So we were left in this now even more bewildering landscape of horrendous traumatic grief, everything that I had been dealing with. Where's that all gone? I've now got an 8-year-old boy who's just lost his mum. He doesn't have any brothers or sisters at this point. What on earth? Just a moment, a time, and then weeks upon weeks and months upon months of fear. That is, for those of you who've been through grief, is what it's like. It's fear. Utter fear and dread about what the future looks like. Listen, when I lost my dad 4 years ago, bless him, you know, he'd been struggling for a while, but he was 76. He'd had a good innings. Yes, it'd been lovely to have him around for a bit longer, but he was ready to go. It was a very different kind of grief. I still miss him. I thought about him so much just being in here tonight, and just thought he'd be so proud watching on in Chroma, seeing his old boy sat up here on the stage. But it was a different kind of grief. With Gemma going inside 3 days, it was traumatic, and it was fear that ruled life from then on. So that period afterwards was about trying to find God in the mess.
So you've gone through highs, lows, a mixture of things. You've got a lot of people here, lots of teenagers who sort of are starting their life in many ways. What would you recommend to us, all of us, in our life? What have you learned that you'd say, okay, this is what I'd like to share about what God has done, or my faith in the highs and in the lows?
So I'll share two things to finish off. The first would be this, and this comes out of what I've just been talking about, and that is to know this truth, and that is whatever you go through in life, whatever you have been through in life, whatever one day you will go through in life, whether it is a high point in life, it's the celebration of a career ambition reached like mine did back in 1998, or it's the depths and the lowness of what I went through back in 2017, the truth is, the great truth is that in every single one of those moments, Jesus walks beside you and never, ever leaves your side. My big question after she died 7 years ago is, where, God, are you in this? None of this makes any sense. That prayer never got answered. I'm so angry with you right now, God, that you've allowed this to happen. Why have you left my son motherless at the age of 8? I was full of anger. I learned that actually, and this is a lesson for all of you, it is okay to be angry with God. God is beyond big enough and mighty enough to take little old me getting very angry at the end of his garden in Reading because of what had happened. And that was really helpful for me, that actually sometimes it's okay to shout our frustrations at God. Our God can handle it. But the biggest lesson I learned was that amidst the mess of that period, amidst the confusion, amidst what at times felt like overpowering darkness, God was always in the darkness. Because the great thing from the cross, as well as Jesus rising from the dead, is this: he experienced true darkness on the cross. When he died on the cross and he experienced that separation from the Father, he experienced true darkness where there is no light, where there is no God. I didn't experience that level of darkness, but I knew that he understood. I'll tell you this story very quickly. I was on one Saturday morning after the funeral, sat on the banks of the River Thames, which flowed beyond the end of our garden in Reading, where we were at the time. It was 2 days after the funeral, so I was at a really low point, because after the funeral, the reality really hits you hard of what this now means. And I got up early again because I couldn't sleep. I was in my dressing gown, I was in my boots. I made my way down to the Thames. It's about 7 in the morning. It's still quite dark. There's a heavy fog. There's some runners in the distance, the other side of the Thames on the towpath, thinking, who's that strange guy in the dressing gown over there? And I lay against this tree, and I felt as low as I've ever felt. I felt there wasn't any point anymore. I knew ultimately there was a point. I needed to be there for him, for Ethan. Didn't need to lose his dad as well, but I just thought, I can't do this. I don't have the strength to walk this rocky path. And I wanted to give up. And for this brief moment, I just thought, I'm giving up on life. I'm giving up on faith. I'm rolling into that river and calling it a day. And I remember as I thought about that moment and doing it, I felt this presence next to me. Just felt someone was there. And I remember looking to my left, and I know some people who maybe are here or watching this who have absolutely no faith will think, well, this is the hallucinations of a grief-stricken, broken, tired man. But I saw this man crouched down, and he was looking at me squarely in the eyes, and he had tears in his eyes. I believed in that moment because I felt this surge of strength running through my body that was Jesus. The Jesus who wept tears at the tomb of Lazarus. The Jesus who promises to be with us in the good times and promises to walk with us in the bad times. The Jesus who says, I will never leave your side. I will follow you as far as the east is from the west. The Jesus who spoke the parable about the shepherd who loses one single sheep and yet goes out to find that sheep and never gives up on that sheep. I just felt that was him in that moment, and I felt this amazing strength. And I thought, I will not give up on my faith. I will not give up on life. I will, of course, not give up on my boy. I'm going to find life again. And that would be the first thing I'd say. He walks with you. And God, over the last few years, has restored my life in ways I never felt was possible. I'm a different person now. He's blessed me in ways I never felt was possible. I married the amazing Dorina nearly 4 years ago now. It was just after COVID. It was a bit of a strange time, still wearing masks in the cathedral, but hey, we could have a wedding in the end. And that in the middle is my little boy, Theo, and that is Talitha being held by Ethan. And when I look at that picture, it fills me with amazing joy because God is the God who restores broken lives. So if you're in a broken place right now, know this. God is in the business of repairing and restoring lives. Unlike the amazing men and women on the Repair Shop and the BBC, he is the master ultimate craftsman. He can rebuild the most broken of people, and he rebuilt me over the last few years and has blessed me. And the last thing I'd say in terms of a message to the young people is simply this. In terms of who you are, in terms of your identity. Listen, I could have gone through the last few years and felt, my identity ultimately is I'm a football presenter. That's who I am. I'm Simon Thomas. I'm a Soccer Saturday presenter. I'm Simon Thomas. I'm a Football League presenter. I present the Premier League. I'm Simon Thomas, the Blue Peter presenter. But ultimately, none of that matters because the most important identity you can ever have is having an identity in Jesus Christ, because there's an identity that is an eternal identity. It's not a fleeting one. So many of our young people, and I'm not just all casting aspersions all over you at this point, but are finding, they're finding their identity, they're finding their meaning in social media likes, in the way in which their videos perform on something like TikTok, although not in America, but that's apparently when Trump re-arrives tomorrow going to be changed again. But are finding their validation, they're finding their worth in things like that. But compared to the love, compared to the faithfulness of Jesus Christ, those things are all utterly worthless. So enjoy those things. Yeah, I'm not saying steer clear, but in terms of your identity, as you grow up, as you chase your dreams, as hopefully one day you pray like I did to God for direction about the way in which your life is going to go, I would encourage you, have your identity firmly rooted in the person of Jesus Christ. Because if nothing else over the last few years, he has been utterly faithful. And in the darkest of moments, he has been the great comforter and the great restorer. And it may not work out in the way that you thought, but unlike the world, he never lets you down.
Amazing. Let's give Simon a round of applause. Thank you, Simon. That was really